Yeah, there we go. Okay. So we're going to be talking tonight about the Ancient Kingdom of Nubia. And I tagline this as one of the earliest examples of African greatness, because people often say that we don't have greatness in our history. And oftentimes people think that our history starts in slavery, which it does not, okay? We have to shift that narrative completely. Our history did not start in slavery. Think about what that does to our kids. If the first thing they're exposed to about who they are and where they come from is chains, whips, and people bent over picking cotton, or people being separated from their families. That doesn't instill pride. That doesn't instill greatness. That doesn't instill wanting to learn more. And especially if we're only teaching about slavery and the same four people from history, right? Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Frederick Douglass, maybe Harriet Tubman. And you keep reteaching that, why would I want to learn more if I'm only learning about the same old things or learning about slavery? So we're going to go ahead and rewind that clock about 3,000 years. And we're going to be looking at some of the earliest examples of African greatness, and that's starting with the Ancient Kingdom of Nubia, okay? So let's get started. So first off and foremost, we have to orient ourselves, right? I always started with my students in this space. You can't start talking about the history of a place unless you know where that place is. And so we look at this map of the continent of Africa, and we see it's 54, now 55 countries, because Sudan has been divided into 2 countries now. We have to figure out, where is Nubia? You will not find Nubia on a current map of Africa, okay? If you're looking at all these different countries, there is no Nubia. And there's a reason for that. And that reason is colonization. When the European powers came in and colonized Africa in 1884 at the Berlin Conference, they literally divided the continent of Africa up into different puzzle pieces that you see here, and said, we're going to run this area, the English are going to run this area, the Portuguese are going to run this area, and then they started naming it. They started coming up with their own names and naming different parts of Africa. So the map you see in front of you is a European creation. So that's why you don't see Nubia on this map, right? Because Nubia was an ancient African kingdom, and they weren't trying to hold on to any of that. So let's get started. So first off and foremost, when we're talking about Nubia, we know it can't be found on modern day maps of Africa. But if we were to look at Africa and we kind of zoom out, we're right here. We're right here in this little red square. That's where the ancient kingdom of Nubia was. And if you zoom in a little bit, you'll see that it would have been found in the modern day countries of Egypt and Sudan. So specifically southern Egypt and northern Sudan. All right. I'm going to pause for a second because I want to know how many people in this meeting, how many people have ever been to Africa, and specifically, how many people have ever been to Egypt? I want to just see. You can throw it in the chat if you got to say me. You can just say me or raise a hand just so I can see. I'm looking at my screen on my. There you go. Thank you, Jane. I appreciate you. Okay. Yes, Katrina. Yes, I assume that might be you too. Going soon. That's right. Been to Morocco. Beautiful. I've been to Morocco, Marrakesh. It was awesome. Came back from Kenya. I was in Kenya and Tanzania just a few months ago. Absolutely. Absolutely. Beautiful, beautiful. So we have some familiarity with the continent, which is what I love to see. South Africa, awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. I've been to Johannesburg. Hopefully you got a chance to go there. I'm trying to go to Cape Town. That's my next destination in South Africa. So just to orient ourselves, Nubia is this kind of shaded area right here on this map. It was Egypt and Sudan. I want to name that because a lot of people think that when you're talking about Nubia, that it was something completely different and separate from ancient Egypt. As you can see, it absolutely is not. You can see that the kingdoms overlapped themselves. And so let's not allow outside people to make our history seem so separate. All these folks were interconnected, and they lived very much right next to each other. So now that we have the understanding of where Nubia was, let's talk about the actual name. Because we have to understand that when these Europeans came over and they started reshaping the continent, they reshaped it oftentimes with European names, right? With European names. Like, we have to understand that in African society, in African history and culture, names have power, names have meaning. So let's not call our countries by a European name. Let's actually get into the actual name of what the original people who lived there called it. So let's break it down in its etymology. So Nubia, the word, actually comes from an ancient Egyptian word which is the root word of Nub, right? And Nub actually means gold, okay? And so when we talk about that, let's figure out why that is. The ancient Egyptians got pretty much all of their gold from their neighbors to the south, which we're talking about Nubia. So they referred to Nubia as the land of gold, right? And that, of course, in their language, which we know as some people call hieroglyphics, but the actual African name was Medu Neter, land of gold translates to Nubia. But hold on for a second. Hold on for a second. I just told you that's an ancient Egyptian word, right? So what did the Nubians actually call themselves? Because we can't assume that they were speaking the same language or that they were actually calling themselves what somebody else called them, okay? So let's go ahead and put some respect on the actual name of the Nubian people, okay? So that's not the original name. It's not the original name. So in addition to having large supplies of gold, which we know because it's called the land of gold or Nubia, the quote unquote Nubians were skilled archers. They were known for their archery. They were known because they had huge armies made up entirely of people who were masters at the bow and arrow. All right, and so you can see this picture here. This is an actual sculptures from ancient Nubia, right? Where you have them marching in a regiment with the bows in their hand, right? With the bows in their hand. So this is going to play a role in their name. So the original, the true name of Nubia was actually Ta Seti, all right? They called their land Ta Seti. Ta Seti, I see some people nodding there. And Ta Seti literally means land of the bow, okay? It literally means land of the bow. So when we talk about Nubia, and we know Nubia is the most commonly used name for this civilization, the original name, all right, is Ta Seti. So you might hear me go back and forth between Ta Seti and Nubia. I'm gonna pause for a second because I always like to make sure folks are with me and follow. If you're with me right now, give me an emoji in the chat or an emoji on your screen. I just want to make sure people are with me. Give me an emoji in the chat or an emoji on your screen. Make sure folks are with me right now. I see you. Appreciate you, Jay. Thank you so much. Jane, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate you, Maisha. Got you. I see that. Thank you, D. Got you. Okay. Okay. There we go. There we go. There we go. Anybody have any questions before we move on to this next piece about the names? Oh, I love that Black Power fist. Appreciate that. Appreciate that. Speaking of, thank you. Jane, is that a question?
Yes, I wanted to know, you mentioned that all of the countries were not the original names. Now, is there any country in Africa that has an original name?
It's a good question. So the country, I'm just going to give you an example. There are a couple. The country of Ghana, for example. Now, there was an ancient civilization. I want to call it ancient. It was, about 800 years ago. No, less than that. It's about 700 years ago. There was a civilization called Ghana. And Ghana was actually the name that they called their kings. The original name of the civilization was called Ouagadougou. So the current country of Ghana took their name from this ancient civilization, but they're not exactly in the exact same places. So the current country of Ghana, which is kind of on the southwestern coast of West Africa, right? The original civilization of Ghana was up a little bit further north in the area of like Mauritania and Burkina Faso. So that would be one of the more earlier names. But names like Botswana, South Africa, even Ethiopia, those are not original African names. Ethiopia is actually a Greek name. It means land of the burnt faces, right? That it comes from Greek. I see a question in the chat. How does the name Nubia relate to Kush, Meroe, Napata, and Punt? Thank you for that. Appreciate that in-depth question. So Kush, Meroe, Napata, Punt, they were all kind of enveloped into this Nubian civilization. Another civilization, or rather another name that Nubia went by was the Kingdom of Kush, right? And so Meroe, Napata, these were all large cities within this much larger civilization, all right? And I want to make sure that we understand that when we're talking about Nubia, we're talking about, like the size of like California plus a little bit of Nevada, Okay, like that's how large we're talking about. Africa is 4 times the size of the United States. So when you look at a map and you see these areas, think about them being much bigger than they actually are. But so they have these huge cities, just like we have cities here. And so Meroe, Napata, these were all cities within the civilization of Nubia or Tasseti. Thank you for that question. Any other questions? Well, as I said before, please continue to put them in the chat. I can absolutely see the chat. All right. So we know we can, now we kind of got our bearings a little bit. We know where Nubia was. We know what it was called. And we got to make sure that we're clear about one particular thing, right? And I have to be clear about this because there's so many people out there who try to shift the narrative that we have to make sure that we are on the same page. The ancient Nubians were unequivocally and absolutely Black people, okay? Just so we get it. And I'm showing you these pictures, right, on purpose, because this is from their own drawings. This is from their own artwork and the artwork of the ancient Egyptians, right, who were their neighbors to the north, right? So this is how the people saw them. This is not some fictionalized Hollywood movie, right, that makes it seem like, you know, these folks have just a really nice tan. No, these were Black African people, and we have to understand that. All right, we have to ground ourselves in that, and we have to make sure our kids know that, because when we start talking about what these Nubian people did, these Tassetian people did, we have to know that they know that these were Black people, that Black folks did this, that Black folks created this, right? Ashe, ashe indeed. All right, and they still are today. And they still are today. If you were to go to southern Egypt, around the town, the area known as Aswan, or you go to northern Sudan, you will see people that look just like this. And these are the descendants of the Nubian people. I was talking to Katrina earlier before we got on, before you all got on, and she was talking about when they go over to Egypt, they have a Nubian guide, right? Because there are still the descendants of Nubians there today. This is not like this is some ancient thing and then all the people are gone, right? The folks who lived there, their descendants are still there. Now they have dwindled in numbers and they're not as flourishing. We can blame white supremacy for that. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. You'll see that in a second. But they are still there. They are still there. Now, how much they know about their history, that's a good question, because just like we have experienced colonized education, they have also experienced colonized education, okay? Absolutely. I'm seeing another comment in the chat that pride in the use of Nubia in African American institutions for centuries. That's right. People will tell, you know, you'll say to each other, my Nubian brother, my Nubian sister, you know, this is from a sense of pride. Even if we don't know the etymology behind it, we don't know where it comes from, we still use it. There's still that latent connection to our history, right? So let's talk about this for a second, because for many of you all who have gone to Egypt or are going to Egypt, you're going to see a lot of similarities, a lot of connections, and you're going to have people try to sever those connections. And we got to make sure that that bond stays connected, that we know the relationship between ancient Egypt and Nubia. So first off and foremost, and there's going to be some text on the screen. Feel free, if you're a note taker, feel free to take notes. I'm going to pause just to make sure everybody has a chance to read. So they were neighbors. We already established that, and they thrived at the same time. So when you got these ancient Egyptians who are building pyramids, right? The Nubians were also building their own structures. When you got the folks in Egypt, in ancient Egypt, and they have the pharaohs, and there's all this gold, and they got all this trade going on, it's also happening to Nubia, all right? So they're thriving at the same time. I just want to kind of name that so that you don't think that like Nubia came way later or was way earlier. This is happening at the same time. And I want to also talk about the Nile River. The Nile River, also the longest river in the world, over 5,000 miles long, is the only major source of fresh water in the whole entire region, okay? It is the most important natural resource that exists there. They call Egypt, or ancient Egypt, the gift of the Nile, because nothing could have happened without the Nile River. And so it ran directly through both kingdoms, as you can see on this map. Now, this is where the interaction part gets hopping off. Yes, thank you. The Happy River. Thank you. See, now I know. This is the honors class. Okay, the Happy River, which is the original name of the Nile River. Okay, that was what the ancient Egyptian, or, and I'm sure somebody out there is waiting for me to say it, the ancient Kemetic people, right? So the original name of Egypt was Kemet. Literally means land of black people. Okay, don't let anyone ever tell you they're talking about the dirt. All right, there are some Egyptologists who want to tell you that Kemet means land of the black land as its soil. No, there is actual symbols that refer to people when they said Kemet, right? So they're talking about themselves. The word Egypt, since we're going to get into it, let's get into it. The word Egypt is an anglicized word from a Greek word called ahyptos, all right? Ahyptos is a Greek word that literally, again, means land of the burnt skin faces. So we have to understand, if we're going to start talking about our history, we have to start using words that our people use and not some European colonizer. All right. They're not new to this, folks. They've been doing this a long time. And they've got it to the point where we don't even know that we're using incorrect words. So thank you for that person in the chat who's making me know that I need to speak truth to power. Appreciate that. So Nile River, or the Happy River, was not only a source of fresh water, but also allowed the two kingdoms to trade products as well as ideas and culture. There are no highways during this point in time. They're not going to have a whole bunch of roads and stuff like that. The Nile River was the major trade way, okay? And so if you wanted to get something from point A to point B, the fastest and best way to do it was on the Nile, or the Happy River. But I want to point something out for a second. The Nile River does not flow in two directions. Does anyone know the direction that the Nile River flows in? You can throw it in the chat. It flows up, or what we like to call north. So the Nile River starts down here in Sudan, actually starts a little bit further south, but we won't get into that now. And it goes upwards through Sudan, through Egypt, and into the Mediterranean Sea. The reason for that is that there are mountains down here, there are higher mountains, and so of course we know water flows downhill. So it flows downhill towards the Mediterranean Sea. But what does that mean? What does that mean for the flow of information and knowledge? What does it mean for the flow of information and knowledge and culture? Someone talk to me. And you can come off mute for this one if you need to. If you feel it, come off mute and let us know. What does that mean? Mrs. Jones is telling us. It flows the same way. It flows the same way. So if I'm living in this area, and have you ever tried to paddle against a current? Have you ever tried to paddle upstream? It is a lot of work and it is hard. Right now, let's be clear. These folks had boats, right? They had boats. They had all sorts of maritime devices and ships. But in order to travel on the Nile River, you needed, the easiest thing to do was to go from south to north. And so we know that majority of the culture, the writing, the knowledge started in the south. It started in the south, y'all. So when we talk, everybody's talking about ancient Egypt, it's all this and it's all great and it's so huge and it's this amazing civilization that lasted for 5,000 years. It absolutely did that. But where did ancient Egypt or ancient Kemet get their information from? Where did they get their knowledge from? It started in the south. Started in the south. So these two nations were joined, folks. They were joined by the Nile River. You dig what I'm saying? And so they weren't two separate things. They were sharing. It was maritime. It was maritime trade. All right. So that's one of the pieces of the relationship. Another piece we have to say, and this I'm kind of jumping in and out of a couple of different areas right quick, but I want to be clear about this too. We have to make sure we have to stamp this for our kids. Both the ancient Egyptians and the Nubians were Africans whose skin color ranged in different shades of brown. What does that mean? That means if these ancient Egyptians or ancient Nubians or Tassetians or Comedians, however you want to call them, were here in this country today, they get stopped by the police. They'd get followed in the stores. They wouldn't get a good loan rate. They wouldn't be, they'd be profiled, when people see their names on resumes, right? These are black people, okay? To be clear, different shades of brown. And I'm saying this part is very specific for these folks who are about to go to Egypt or who have been, because this is what's going to happen. So because they were so close to each other, the two groups, they often mixed. And sometimes they were friendly with each other, and other times they had conflict. This is like any neighbor, okay? Sometimes, you know, your neighbor's tree is growing and it goes over your fence, and so now you're angry with your neighbor. You weren't always angry with your neighbor, but now you are, okay? So there was peaceful times and there was conflict. But because of that, and to be clear, we're talking about a thousands of year span of history. It's not like these two groups were around for like 50 years and they, you know, had some, you know, peaceful times for like 25 years and they're beefing for 25 years. We're talking thousands of years. And so because of this, a lot of historians try to make it seem like when the Nubians ruled ancient Egypt, right? When the Nubians ruled ancient Egypt during the 18th century, and this is a true thing, the ancient Nubians or the Tassetians invaded ancient Egypt or Kemet in the 18th dynasty, and they took over. So the Nubians ruled Kemet during that time period. But when historians look at this time period, they say, oh, look, this is the only time Black folks ran Kemet, okay? This is a historically inaccurate piece of information that is done constantly. I was at a museum not too long ago here in Atlanta. It was for they brought in King Tut mask, and they had a whole thing about it, and they had a whole part talking about in the 18th dynasty when the Nubians came and they had all these Black folks there. But this is not the case. The Black folks were all up in Egypt or Kemet hundreds of years, thousands of years before and after that. The reason why the Nubians had to come in the first place was because outsiders had actually come in to colonize. All right, they call that the intermediate period. So I want to say that because you're going to see magazine covers like this, right? National Geographic talking about the Black pharaohs, talking about the 18th dynasty, talking about Nubia, right? But they were always Black folks. Kemet literally means the land of Black people, right? So this is what we're talking about. There were always Black people there, always. We can do a whole presentation. We can do a whole presentation on an ancient Kemet because there's so much more to this story, right? But we're gonna try to condense like 5,000 years into like 45 minutes. So we're gonna do that right now. I'm looking at the chat really quickly. Yep. African features. So you're gonna see that in a second. Don't worry, I got you. So we can't talk about this area and not talk about pyramids. I was just talking to Katrina earlier and telling her when I was over in Egypt, I went all the way to Egypt and didn't see the pyramids. I don't know how it happened. I was on an academic trip and went all the way over there and didn't get to see the pyramids. But we know when people think about Egypt, they think about the pyramids, okay? But there were also Nubian pyramids, right? This is not a story that's often told. And so when we talk about exchanging of ideas and goods, Nubians and ancient Egyptians also exchanged knowledge. It takes knowledge and education to build a pyramid, right? One of the most significant pieces of knowledge that they shared with each other was how to build pyramids. Oh, and yes, by the way, the word pyramid is a Greek word, right? The word pyramid is a Greek word. The actual word, the Kemetic word, the Black people word of pyramids was Mer, M-I-R or M-E-R, depending on who you ask. And that literally means ray of light or sunlight or sun ray. Because if you look at the pyramid, it looks like it's a ray of light coming down from the sun, okay? So it's expanding like that. So that's what it actually means, but I digress. And so when people talk about pyramids, they're usually associated with ancient Egypt or Kemet, but most people don't know that the ancient Egyptians only built about 100 pyramids. The Nubians, however, had 223 pyramids. So again, when I tell you that the information and the culture flowed from south to north, these Nubian folks, they were doing this. They had been doing this. They had been about this pyramid work, right? This is why if you go to Nubia right now, you can find the remnants of around or a little over 200 pyramids. Okay, right? I appreciate you. Thank you. I appreciate you, your love in the chat. So let's look at it for a second, right? What do you notice? This is that interactive part, y'all. Let me hear you. What do you notice about Nubian pyramids, which are on top, and Kemetic or ancient Egyptian periods, which are pyramids, which are down below? What do you notice? Similarities, differences. I'll take anything you got. Size, for sure. Absolutely. Size is the difference. Most ancient Kemetic pyramids were much larger in size than the Nubian pyramids. There's a reason for that. Anything else? Yes, absolutely the same material, because they're in the same area. This is that yellow limestone. Fun fact, the pyramids did not look like that originally. They actually had white limestone on the outside. So this yellow limestone, that was like the under casing, right? Or like, if you go to a house and you see them building it, it's like that, you got the wood inside and then they put the, all the other stuff on the outside. Pyramids back in these days were actually made out of white limestone on the outside to give it that polished look. I see a question. Did Nubian build pyramids for a longer period than Egyptians to the north? Absolutely. They built them for a longer period. I think. So let me rephrase that. So the first pyramid was designed and built by a brother named Imhotep. Okay, Imhotep, world's first multi-genius. He was a doctor, architect, mathematician, scientist, vizier, all these things. He designed and built the first pyramid. It's the step pyramid over at Saqqara. If you've ever been to Egypt and you go to Saqqara, you see his work there. But he was widely traveled and widely and knew a lot of things. So he probably studied in Nubia, right? Or taught the people in Nubia how to build pyramids. But we know that the ancient Nubian pyramids, if you look at the front, you see these doorways, right? You see these doorways attached to the outside. Nubian pyramids, for the most part, served as temples, right? Served as temples. So you go in there, there's no one buried in the Nubian pyramids, right? Kemetic pyramids, over the course of time, shifted to be tombs, right? Shifted to be tombs so that you would find pharaohs and other folks buried either in or under many of the pyramids. But in Nubia, they mostly served kind of like churches or like mosques, right? These were the buildings where a lot of folks worshiped, all right? You wouldn't find a lot of people buried in Nubian pyramids for the most part, Appreciate that education in the chat. Any other questions here? Absolutely. They were absolutely universities. Because ancient Kemetic and Nubian or Tassetian religion was so ingrained in everyday life, everything revolved around the religion. They don't even call it religion. It was just a way of life, whether it be ma'at or whatever it is that you call it. It was infused in everything. And so whether you're learning how to read, how to write, how to farm, how to pray, how to do anything, it all revolved around the religion. So any building that's going to be built is also going to have to be done in respect to the religion. So let's talk about another sculpture. Let's talk about another monument, another building that was made out of stone, because it's not just the pyramids. Let's talk about Abu Simbel. I have been here. I didn't get to go to the pyramids, but I have been to Abu Simbel. So let's just get a little background really quickly. So Abu Simbel, if you go to Egypt today and you go to the city of Aswan, located in South Egypt, you'll see a monument/temple dedicated to the ancient Egyptian pharaoh Ramses II called Abu Simbel. All right? Still there today. Now, the reason why I'm talking about it in this presentation is because it was built on Nubian land. So there was another period of time before the 18th dynasty where where ancient Egypt, Kemet, and Nubia, Tasseti, were battling for land. And the ancient Egyptians defeated the Nubians. And so they built this huge structure, this huge monument on Nubian land to remind them of the strength of the Egyptian empire or the Kemetic empire, right? Just a reminder like, hey, remember that time we whooped y'all? Here's a reminder. It's a massive monument and temple that was carved directly into the side of the mountain. So I say monument and temple because remember, everything revolved around the religion. It depicted Ramses II sitting on 4 thrones surrounded by statues of various gods and family members, right? Now, we get into some nomenclature here. The monument was originally called the Temple of Ramses II in the Kemetic language or the Medunetta. The name Abu Simbel was the name of the young Egyptian boy who was the guide to 2 European explorers who uncovered the temple after being covered in sand for thousands of years. So they had to dig this thing up. This was not something that was just standing out there like the pyramids were. This whole monument was kind of covered in sand. And these European explorers were out there and they had this guide. You go to Egypt today, you'll get a guide. They had this young boy, he was out there and he led them to this monument, this temple, this mountain. And so they named it in honor of him. But it's actually called Temple of Ramses II. But that's where the name Abu Simbel comes from. You may or may not get that on a tour. Just want to throw that in there. This is what it looks like from the front. This is Abu Simbel. You can see it was carved into this mountain. This is limestone. It's the same material that the pyramids were built out of. I want to just talk about the grandeur of this building. If you see my little cursor, that's a person. That right down there is a person. Okay, so it gives you the idea of the size that these folks were building. Okay, we gonna get there, Aquila. Don't steal my shine. Come on. So we gotta talk about this, right? Kemetic people, Nubian people, they built for eternity, right? This is something that they did. They built for eternity. And that's why this is still standing today. They built in such a way that they wanted this to last and stand the test of time. So I want you to see this right here. But before we go, I just want to make sure that I represent the women here as well. He also had another temple built for his wife, Queen Nefertari, on the other side of the mountain, right? So I don't want you to just think that it's just about the guys. Queen Nefertari also had her own temple that was built as well, her own monument, because women were absolutely respected in ancient Kemet and Nubia, and there were female pharaohs, there were female gods and goddesses that had as much, if not more, respect than their male counterparts. I see a question in the chat: why did the descendants of the Nubians allow their cultural monuments to dissolve into disrepair? It's a really good question. That has multiple answers. One being thousands of years of environmental weathering and erosion can obviously do that. You're in a place where it can get up to 120 degrees in the sun. Wind blasts, sandstorms, things of that nature, that can cause it. We do know that during the Muslim invasion in 8th century AD, when the spread of Islam was happening and moving through North Africa, many of, and this might have been a little bit after, but the new Muslim rulers of these areas were going in and stripping the white limestone off of the pyramids and other temples that they were encased in, and using them to build into other cities and towns in Saudi Arabia. So you can go to other places, even in North Africa, you'll find whole cities made out of white limestone. That white limestone came from a lot of these monuments and places like that. The third answer is white supremacy and colonization. That will always be one of the answers. If you're looking at a multiple choice test and that's an answer, choose that one. Because what we know is that many Europeans coming into Africa have tried to steal and disassociate the culture, the history, the monuments from African people. I mean, there are whole movies made out of that are dedicated to aliens coming in and building the pyramids, right? There are whole groups of people saying that it couldn't have been Africans, that Europeans came to North Africa, did all this stuff, and then went back to Europe. Okay, this is a story that's been told many times over the continent. So so we see that as well. But those would be my answers to that. So going back to this for a second, and I see your point about flood lines. We're going to get into floods in a second. So we're back at the beginning of this. So if you look at this, you see there's a doorway, right? Because this is not just a monument. This is not just a sculpture like the Lincoln Monument. This is a temple, right? So people need to be able to go in and show respect and pray and things of that nature. So you go into this door right there at the bottom, and you're led into this room. This is the first antechamber. And you'll see these towering statues of King Ramses or Pharaoh Ramses. Originally, these were all painted. They had color, brown skin, all of these things. The ancient Kemetic people were good for covering walls with reliefs and pictures and medu netter and all sorts of various drawings and things of that nature. So imagine this in its full splendor 4,000 years ago. So then you go in. So this is the first antechamber. You still get an idea of the size. You see this guy here comparative to the other piece. You can, if you were to continue further back, so you're walking forward now. You're in the first antechamber going into the second antechamber. This is what the second antechamber looks like. So now you're a little bit further in. You still have columns. Oh, and by the way, if you ever learned any time in your educational history that the ancient Greeks created columns like Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian columns, just go ahead and erase that from your memory. That actually is not a factual statement. The ancient Greeks came to Egypt, learned about columns, brought it back to Greece. All right, we get columns in Africa. Columns are an African invention. Just want to put that out there. That's not the point of this conversation. So you go from the front to the first antechamber, second antechamber. Again, look at all the pictures and drawings. Remember, this is a temple. So you see lots of depictions of gods and goddesses on the wall here. And then you go into the very last room. I'm telling you all this for a reason. This very last room, which is in the back of the temple, shows the Pharaoh Ramses sitting with 3 different gods. This is all carved out of stone into the mountain. I just want to just name that again. These folks were out here with no bulldozers, no laser anything. They're talking about hand chisels and hauling it out of here, right? Into the heart of a mountain. So just think about the mathematical precision. Think about the scientific knowledge of how much you can take out of a mountain before it falls on you, okay? Think about sizing, scale, that all of these sculptures are the same size, right? Talk about weight, talk about columns, how much weight a certain column can handle before it has to be able to, before you need another one, before it crumbles, right? Think about just the mathematical and scientific knowledge. Just want to say that. So you're in this back room, and this is kind of like the point of the whole temple. You have Ramses seated next to a bunch of different gods, okay? Because the Pharaoh was considered God on earth by the ancient Kemetic people. He was actually believed that the god Horus, or Heru, if we're going to use the original name, was manifesting himself as the Pharaoh. So basically you have 4 gods here, okay? Now, why do I tell you all of this? Here we go. So let's talk about Abu Simbel as an architectural marvel. So besides being carved by hand with no modern day technology, the Temple of Ramses II was a mathematical and scientific masterpiece, okay? It's a lot here, so I'm gonna read it and you can go ahead and get ready for your questions. So in order to honor the Pharaoh Ramses II, the designers and architects of the temple constructed it in a way so that on the same days every year, which are Ramses' birthday, October the 20th, and his coronation day, the day he was crowned Pharaoh, February 20th, the sun literally shined a beam of light through a hole in the front of the temple, through the first antechamber, through the second antechamber, and into that last row, and on the face of the gods in the back room of this temple. It didn't happen on any other day except for his birthday and the day he was crowned pharaoh. If that's not Black excellence, I don't know what is. Think about the calculus, right? Bad man pajamas. Think about calculus. Think about trigonometry. Think about knowing the arc of the sun and knowing where it's going to be before it's going to be there, right? These were master astronomers and master mathematicians, master builders. When I talk about building for eternity, this is what I'm talking about, okay? And these were, and again, I'm going to say it out loud for those in the back, Black people. Black folks did this, right? So when people try to tell you that Black folks don't have any history, or the only thing we did was make a traffic light, please direct them to this, okay? All right? However, okay, there's a but here, y'all. There's a but. Somebody mentioned it earlier that they had to move it. They did. You can see here, they are literally disassembling Abu Simbel. Let's talk about why. Starting in 1964, in order to supply northern Egypt with hydroelectric power, the Egyptian government, with help from several Europeans, let's be clear, started to build a dam in the middle of the Nile River. You might know that dam as the Aswan High Dam, if you've ever been, okay? So they placed the dam right in the middle of the Nile River. When the water starts to rise behind the dam, that's what happens with dams. When you put a dam on something, the water backs up and it creates a man-made lake. The government decided to try and save Abu Simbel. So they put this dam right over by Aswan. This lake starts to form, and then they realize, oh, snap, this lake is rising really, really fast, and it's about to cover all of Abu Simbel. It's the water was actually rising to the point where it was getting to the feet, right? And so they were like, oh, I guess we got to do something about this. So they actually started to cut the monument into different pieces and literally move the whole mountain up on the higher ground to be able to preserve this historical masterpiece. So I guess, bravo, thanks. But what do y'all think happened? Somebody talk to me in the chat. When you moved it, what happened? We'll get to that. Yep, that absolutely happened. That absolutely happened. People were 100% displaced. But what else happened in regards to the monument? Some pieces may have fallen off. Yeah, that happened.
Yeah. The explanation that you had about the temple and the sun no longer does that. Couldn't
Right.
type all of that.
No, I appreciate you. I appreciate you. Absolutely. Absolutely. It changed alignment, as John tells us in the chat. It changed alignment. It is no longer at the exact place where it needed to be for this beam of light to be able to make it in, right? So that doesn't happen anymore. That does not happen anymore because it was then moved. And so, like I said here, the monument has been moved. The sun no longer shines on the faces of Ramses and the gods in the same days that they had calculated it. And so, additionally, much of Nubian history is lost to us at this time because it's at the bottom of Lake Nasser, right? It's at the bottom of Lake Nasser. We have Nubian artifacts. Whole Nubian villages are literally at the bottom of this Lake Nasser, at the bottom of this lake. Me and Katrina were talking earlier before y'all got on, and she was telling me how there used to be a whole bunch of different Nubian groups, and now there are only like 7. Part of the reason where there are so few Nubian groups, or what some people call tribes right now, is because they have been displaced because their whole village is literally underwater. So again, if you see on a multiple choice test, white supremacy, it may fall into play here, okay? Right? And some people actually died. Some people refused to leave their ancestral home and actually died during the creation of this lake, okay? So kind of bringing it to a close here, folks. So when we talk about ancient Kemet and we talk about ancient Nubia or Tasseti, we have to understand that these were examples of African greatness, that our people come from greatness. We have greatness in us. we are capable of reshaping our reality to bring those who are familiar with the Khan terminology, Sankofa, to bring our history back to the present so it can inform our future. And it's something that we all should know and our kids should know, because if we know better, we can do better. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate that. This has been fantastic. I love the energy in the chat. I love the energy that you all have been bringing. I'm going to open up for questions right now. I'm going to open up for anybody who has any questions that maybe I didn't get a chance to address, or didn't get a chance to talk about. If you have anything that you want to bring up. So thank you. Thank
you so much, Joseph, for giving us that presentation. I'm still in awe. It's going to take a minute to process a lot of the things, but like you mentioned, there are several people on the call that were very also familiar with some of these, some of the things, and are already there, and some of us that are catching up to what you shared. It's amazing. I actually have chills right now with some of what you shared. So yeah, wonderful. So yes, if you have any comments, it looks like there's a question now. Please go right on ahead. Jane, you can come off mute.
I'm wondering, I know this was a lot of information for the time period. Will you have more similar to this?
I would absolutely like to do that. This was our first time doing this. It's always my intent to ensure that our guests and our community have the truth. I strongly believe that when we're making these trips to Africa, to Egypt, that it's not just about visiting and seeing sites and taking photos and posting on Instagram, all that good stuff. It's about really learning our history. So I've learned after several trips to Egypt that it's not going to be handed to you when you're in Egypt, unfortunately. You have to seek out the knowledge. And so I was very humbled to be able to reach back out to Joseph and say, hey, I know this is your jam. Please, if you can come on and provide us some support and give us some direction, because Nubia is one of the places we visit on our trips to Egypt. So we take families to Egypt. Nubia is one of the primary tours on our trip. And it's for the purpose of showing our families and our children where we came from. So in short, the answer is yes. I will absolutely love to do that. So your feedback is very appreciated.
Yeah. And I'll just say this, Jane and others, one of the things I realized, as an educator, is that a lot of times my world was within the four walls of my classroom. Like, I was giving this information to a lot of kids, and sometimes they share with their parents. So I decided to write books so I can expand that knowledge. And so 2 of my books that I have here have all this information in it, plus like so much more. And these are actually workbooks to help parents and teachers actually teach this to their kids. So there are activities in here. There are reading comprehension questions. There are whole texts, and it starts in ancient Africa and goes all the way into modern times. And so, yes, thank you for the homeschool. I love my homeschool families. So these are absolutely there. I'm going to throw these links in the chat just in case folks might have missed it. But also, here, my information is on the screen. If you ever are in the need, just curious about stuff, like, hey, you have some questions or whatever, like, shoot me an email. I have no problem talking to you, your kids, your group. And it doesn't even have to be about like just one of these. Like, it could literally be like, hey, like, talk to me. Like, I want to know more. Do you have a book list, right? Like, absolutely.
Yeah, we love to get that book list as well. Yeah. There's a couple of questions in here, Joseph, and one of them I actually want to piggyback on. So Davis asked, what do you say to individuals who say we are not from Egypt, but West Africa? And to piggyback on that question, when I've traveled to Egypt, many Egyptians do not identify with being from Africa. They do not, they will tell you we're not Africans. So what do you say to that?
Yeah, I would say two things. So first, in our immediate history, the majority of us come from West Africa, and that's by nature of the slave trade, or what some people call the Ma'afa. So people in this hemisphere, for the most part, if you have who've been here and you came and your ancestors came because of slavery, came from West Africa. However, what we do know is that the cradle of civilization is in Africa, and we do know that starting in and around Tanzania, Uganda, South Africa, kind of that whole southern region, civilization started there and then moved north, and civilization started to blossom. So when we talk about Kemet and Nubia, that's one of the world's first civilizations. So anything, writing, religion, philosophy, government, anything that you can think of came from these first civilizations. So anything we have started there. Okay, so let's just start there. We also know that there were Kemetic and Nubian sailors who took off from ancient Kemet, from ancient Nubia, sailed around Africa, right? Or sailed through the Mediterranean Sea, across the Atlantic Ocean, and into what we now know today as Mexico. Specifically, if you go to a place in Mexico, you think about Mexico and it kind of dips down there right in the middle, that kind of like dip in the center of Mexico. You go to a place called La Venta in Mexico, you'll see remnants of a civilization called the Olmec civilization. They're known for having these huge stone heads. Archaeological evidence shows that many of those stone heads were carved in, what's the word I'm looking for? They're carved to represent African people, specifically people from West Africa and people from Nubia. If you see, one of the things that people don't usually look at, when you look at the front of them, it's obviously absolutely African on the front, but most people don't see the back. The back of these stone heads shows the remnants of helmets, braids, like when we talk about cornrows, right? That are consistent with what people have found in Nubian archaeology. So like headgear, right? Looking at in Mexico and in Nubia. So we see both West African and we see Nubian influence there as well. Ivan Van Sertima's book, They Came Before Columbus, right? They Came Before Columbus. It's a fantastic book that talks about the connection between Africa and the so-called Americas.
Yeah, I got that book on my shelf too. That was a book that my mom introduced us to very early on. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's a good resource as well.
It came before Columbus, yep.
Yep. Any more questions? And I do want to add to that, Joseph, something that you said about corn rolls. On our trips, on our trips to Egypt, we visit the Old Cairo Museum. And actually there's another museum. I think it's I can't remember the name of it, but they have this parade of the pharaohs, and you see the pharaohs unclothed, the mummies unclothed, and you pretty much see pharaohs with curly hair, corn rolls, like I'm like, they were braiding hair like corn, like plaits and corn rolls from thousands of years ago that remains. So the hair grade, color, texture remains from that long ago, and you can't deny that. And I think for myself, as well as those that have traveled to Egypt or that are soon on their way to Egypt, there's this moment where you have this awakening, so to speak, or a disruption, and what you've been taught your entire life is what you're seeing, and what you've seen has contradicted it completely. And it's a sort of a, it feels disruptive.
Yeah.
Feels very disruptive. And you just come back with more questions. Yep. You come back with like, wait a minute, like this color is here for a reason. This is not colored just for decorative. This is how they looked. This is the nostrils. This is the cheekbones, and even the statues of the pharaohs that's inside of Old Cairo Museum. They look like cousin Ray Ray. They look like, somebody on on the block. They look like actual family relatives, and these were pharaohs, and not just of that 18th dynasty.
Yeah.
There's and I'm not gonna butcher his name, so for the sake of that, King Tut's father, King Tut's father.
Akhenaten.
Yes.
So look,
Broad cheekbones, wide nostrils. I mean, a beautiful man, but clearly of African descent. And that wasn't the 18th dynasty. Is that correct?
no, absolutely not.
Right.
Yeah, no, it was definitely not the 18th dynasty. And to be clear, I just want to make great connection. So these are all pictures, from their own hand and their own observation of people from ancient Kemet. So these are Kemetic people that you're seeing on the screen. The sister in the top left, right? That's Queen T. That's King Tut's grandmother. Okay, so let's not even play games with who King Tut was and what he looked like. Yeah, National Geographic and the museum in Cairo, they have all these digital recreations. Let's not play games. This is his grandmother, right? We know what King Tut looked like, okay? Despite what they talk about. And there are all sorts of representations of King Tut where he has brown skin, okay? So they're going out of their way to take the most famous piece of ancient Egyptian history, Kemetic history, and making it European or making it Arab.
Yeah.
But these folks were Black. Nubians were Black. We did that, period, end of story.
Yeah. All right. So any closing remarks? We are definitely want to be able to do this a second time, a part 2. This is very engaging. So if you guys have any closing remarks, any questions, what would you like to talk about next on our next call? If we able to, are able to do this sooner than later, what would you like us to discuss? Would you like to go deeper into ancient Kingdom of Ancient Nubia, go into ancient Kemet? If you have any ideas of what you would like to explore, just let us know in the chat. We must turn off the TV and travel. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, so we're going to go ahead and close us out. Again, if you're joining us, okay, I see Connect the Twa, the Khoi, and San to the people of Kemet. And okay, Tasseti, that's a good one. That definitely would be over an hour. That definitely would be. Black history in Europe. Good one.
Good one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, continue to put those in the chat. So yeah, just for those of you guys that joined late, my name is Katrina Morrison. I'm the owner of Mocha Travel. My passion is bringing families together through global experiences. And one of our more popular destinations is Egypt. I'm passionate about making sure that our children have opportunities to see the world and see themselves. Kids that travel dream in color. That's my belief. They can see things, imagine themselves doing extraordinary things. They can see themselves in these amazing depictions that they get to witness with their own eyes, and be able to contribute to their classrooms and to their communities. And we are here joined by Joseph Edelin, who is an educator and author. Those book links are in the chat. I will follow up with each and every one of you through email to make sure you have those links. Make sure you are, how you can learn more about our trips over to Egypt or South Africa or to Ghana, some of those destinations we're beginning to bring on. And I hope to see you again soon on an upcoming trip or on an upcoming session of our Untold Journeys. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thank you again, Joseph, for joining us. And I will talk to you all soon. Have a good night.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night, y'all. This is great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Good night, Bernstein. Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you, John. Thank you, Aquila.
Could you tell us about how do we get the recording?
Yes, I will definitely follow up with you in email. Thank you so much for reminding me. Yes,
Thank you.
yes,
Thank
this
you
is a
very much.
jewel. So yes, we'll
I-
definitely make sure this is we're able to share this information. So yes.
Wonderful. I look forward to communication with you all because my people need to hear about this. I educate them daily, but what we are doing here is phenomenal and we should make it happen. God bless you all.
Thank you, Davis. Thank you so much. Thank you,
You're
Christina.
welcome.
Good night, Mrs. Jones. Thank you, guys. Looks like we're almost, yep, got a few more. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Seshmit. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. All right, and we're out of here.